Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We have a jam-packed show for you today. We got another commitment to discuss. We've got a lot of recruiting notes to review. We've also got a basketball recruiting pickup that we'll get into a little bit later. And then Daniel Gallen and I are going to go position by position on Penn State's offensive personnel and start to work our way through what the depth chart could look like when the Nittany Lions return to the practice field in early August. From quarterback through offensive tackle, you'll hear our take on everything. Some evolving circumstances across the positions, including newcomers to the roster via transfer, freshman class, and then you've also got some veterans making strides. There are injuries in play too. So we'll break down that offensive depth chart a little bit later. Without hesitation, we'll bring on a familiar voice for everybody who's followed this podcast lately, and that's Tyler Calvaruso, because a day doesn't go by anymore, Tyler, where we don't have Penn State football recruiting news to get into. And lately it's been of the commitment variety. That continues today. We're recording on a Thursday. Figured we wouldn't go 3 consecutive days with a show, but we came to you Tuesday, in case you missed it, breaking down the additions of Top 247 quarterback Troy Hune out of California in the 2026 class, and then Max Granville, one of the premier edge rushers in the 2025 cycle out of Texas, committed to Penn State on Monday. So go back to that Tuesday episode if you want to hear more about those 2 additions. And if you want to hear about the weekend where Penn State added 3 commitments and lost 2 commitments, go to our Monday episode. All right, fast forward to where we are now, Thursday afternoon, about 24 hours after Jayden Woods became the latest addition to the Nittany Lions 2025 class, another top 24/7 prospect, 4-star out of Kansas, another edge rusher as well. Deion Barnes is catching fire.
Yeah, it's been a heck of a run for Penn State and Deion Barnes in specific here recently. You go out and you get Max Granville on Monday, and then 48 hours later, you've got another top 24/7 standout in your class. Woods, man, when you look at his athletic profile, multi-sport athlete, everything that he's accomplished throughout his prep career, it's another really, really good get for Penn State. There are people who think that he has first-round pick potential at some point. Physically, he is where he needs to be at around 6'3" and 240, one of those potential freak athlete, freak build kind of guys for Penn State. He's different than Granville in the sense that he's bigger, but both are top-end edge rushers, and Barnes wanted both these guys. He's got them on board now. It's starting to get a little bit crowded on the edge, but it's getting crowded in a really positive manner here for Penn State.
You and I will break down what we think they've got cooking right now in the 2025 edge rusher class. But getting back to Deion Barnes, this is a guy who got the job as defensive line coach with the Nittany Lions like the day before spring ball of 2023. It was right before spring ball started. John Scott Jr. left to take a job with the Detroit Lions at that point. And so he gets elevated. He'd been around the program, not just as a player in the past and an all Big Ten performer in the past, but as an assistant coach in that defensive line room. Here he is a year later. We talked about what he brought in, especially at defensive tackle in the 2024 group, and that's going to really pay dividends, I think, long-term for Penn State on the field in years to come. But now the focus and the spotlight for us has to be on what they've accomplished at the defensive end position. And so with that and the versatility, going to different parts of the country and doing this, how quickly is Deion Barnes elevating his stature, not just as a coach, but as a recruiter?
There were plenty of people who felt that once Barnes got really settled into an on-field role that he'd be able to recruit at this level and consistently get guys at this kind of a clip. And now you're seeing it come to fruition. No, he has a lot to sell on the trail, and not just in the sense that he played in the NFL and knows what it takes to get there from own personal experience. He has now coached guys up and gotten them to the NFL too. Just had Chop Robinson become a first-round pick. Adiza Isaac went off the board in the first half of that 2024 NFL draft going to the Ravens. So it's just a matter of his own personal experience. He's young. He can relate to these guys. And now he's got some pedigree too here early in his coaching career. Year one's an on-field guy, and you're sending 2 guys off to the league as relatively high draft picks, especially Robinson going in the first round with the Dolphins. It's just he has a lot working for him on the trail right now. And again, he is a relatable guy. A lot of these guys have backgrounds where they can relate to Deion Barnes and everything he's been through throughout his career as a player. They feel that Penn State is the place they could go. They could be comfortable with Barnes, and they could develop under his watch as well. You saw that with Granville, where Penn State did a really good job selling the developmental aspect, and it happened again with Woods. And also with Woods, we'd be remiss to ignore the relationship between Woods' father and James Franklin. Franklin recruited his father to play for him at Kansas State. He trusted him with his career. Now he's trusting Franklin with his son. So it kind of comes all full circle here in this situation.
A really cool little nugget involved in the recruiting process. Obviously, something that was pretty a big deal when you think about it, and in the trust involved in that relationship. Now, Woods, he had just come off of a visit to Tennessee. Purdue was in that mix. Florida, Wisconsin. From what you've gathered, why was this the recruiting edge in favor of the Nittany Lions?
The relationship was definitely a big part of it. You know, it goes without saying, when you have that level of trust, it works in your favor, and that's what Penn State was a big feather in its cap with Woods. Another situation where they did well on the developmental front. Barnes, Torrance Brown, they just meshed well with Woods. And Tom Allen played a big part in that as well. I mean, we saw it with our own eyes. Allen and Woods chatting pretty for an extended period of time during that 7-on-7 tournament during Woods' official visit weekend. Allen was even offering some pass rushing advice, and Woods was very receptive to that. So just throughout his visit, you got the vibe that it was going really, really well. Quite frankly, though, for a little bit, I thought it was going to be Purdue for Woods. I wasn't sure he was actually going to leave the Midwest. Purdue was presenting itself as a pretty intriguing option to him. Tennessee came on strong. I know the Vols wanted him. So, and Wisconsin got Woods for an official visit as well. So I really thought it was going to be Purdue for a little bit, but Penn State gets this one done. Comes down to the relationships, comes down to the developmental aspect of his recruitment. Penn State really hit it out of the park in that pitch.
Let's get into the prospect profile of Jayden Woods a bit. You mentioned the size, 6'3", 240. This is not a guy who's going to come to town, and you're going to wonder how long is it going to take to get the weight on him. He's already got that physique. He's already got the ability to carry that muscle mass. He's proven that already at this age. He's a 3-time football state champ, but he's a 3-time track and field champion as well, Mr. Calvaruso. And people will be like, well, what's the correlation? We talked about it with Jayden Williams a couple years back, how he was a shot put champion and one of the premier shot putters really across the country in his high school class. And Brian Doan broke down for us what you're looking at and from an offensive lineman and the way you have to be able to contort your body and use that torque and then show that power. Just a lot that you can kind of grab and pull from some of these things. 2-time discus champion, and also in the shot put, he won a state championship. On the football field, he gets done as well. 120-plus tackles, 20 of those coming for loss, 13 sacks in the last 2 seasons combined. He's also somebody that we've seen get out in the field, force some fumbles, wreak some havoc. So when you kind of look at him in a vacuum, before we get to the other defensive ends, what kind of a prospect is Penn State going to add in 2025? And then what kind of a player do you think we could see here in Happy Valley come 2027, 2028?
He already has really strong hands, so I think that'll play pretty well for him early on in his career. He knows how to get off blocks. He's good against the run. That's always big, you know, when you're a young edge rusher. A lot of those guys are so zoned in on their pass rush ability and getting after the quarterbacks. You know, sometimes they suffer in the run game a little bit. Not the case with Woods. He contributes plenty in that regard. He's a really physical kid. I mentioned the strength, but he's just really physical with the way that he goes up against opposing offensive linemen. He sheds blocks quite well, in my opinion. You know, on the developmental side, maybe his bend can improve a little bit coming off the edge, but that's something Barnes will work with him on. So I think right off the bat, you're getting a kid who's really strong and has a lot of traits that, you know, maybe he could see the field a little bit earlier if he kind of takes off in his development. Long term, if he improves his bend and just kind of, you know, really becomes more of an all-around pass rusher in that regard, to continues to develop his moves, I think Penn State's going to get a really, really good edge rusher here. I like the upside, and I think there's a lot to work with here for Barnes and the staff, especially from a strength and conditioning program as well. We mentioned with Granville being already physically put together, Woods maybe even more so. You know, the 2 physically impressive kids here that Chuck Lowe is going to get the chance to work with.
And to add these guys within a 48-hour window, just tremendous for Penn State staff and looking toward that 2025 incoming class. Woods, by the way, in our 24/7 Sports rankings, number 167 overall. He's the number 18 edge rusher nationally. and he's ranked 5th among all rising seniors in the state of Kansas, where he attends Mill Valley High School. That's in the city of Shawnee. When I look at this guy and I reviewing a little bit of his highlights, and at first I actually put on his sophomore film and I was like, okay, this is good. And then I realized, I'm watching 2022 film here. But I think the speed, initially he's like a one-on-one speed guy, right? Like he's going to beat you off the edge. He's going to win battles in camp because he's got that speed. But then you start to watch the junior film and there's more power involved there. There's a little bit more of moves in the tool bag. I think that's still a long way to go. But what excites me here is I think maybe early on he was able to win so many of those battles with his speed. And he probably still can. He won't be able to do that against tackles in the Big Ten. So to see him already establishing that strength, that power, and oh, by the way, he reached the state tournament as a wrestler, which anybody who's a standout wrestler and you're a football recruit, that's a win. Like that's something that we have to note about somebody. So the competitive spirit is there. It's a nice blend of strength and speed. I know he's currently ranked like 15 to 10 spots ahead of Max Granville. Mm-hmm. Personally, if I can only pick one of these guys, or if I'm ranking them right now, I would pick Granville just because of the explosive nature of his game. But when you talk about the physique that's already in place and the growth that it looks like is still ahead of Jayden Woods in a lot of different ways, and just the multi-sport success he's had, I think as you project them long-term, and I can understand why Woods might end up being the more desirable NFL draft prospect. But first, we got to get him to campus, and we got to see the coaching staff work with them, and they've got to earn opportunities. But those are the kind of talents you're adding here, guys that eventually at the other end, you're expecting to be high-level NFL draft prospects when we're discussing them as top 200 recruits.
Measurably, I think that's kind of what has Woods ahead of Granville in the rankings when you take into account how important measurables are in terms of projection. The way we do our rankings, projecting to the next level and projecting to the NFL. It comes back to what we talked about, I think, earlier in the week with Granville. There's just so much Chop Robinson in him. And we saw Robinson as an elite recruit, and Granville is at that same level. He's a little bit smaller and maybe not your prototypical edge rusher, while Woods kind of is your prototypical edge rusher from a physical standpoint in terms of measurables at 6'3" and 240. If I had to pick one, man, that's tough. I think I'd go with Grant.
No, neither does Penn State. I just, but it's an exercise, and we like to do those on the podcast.
Yeah, no, it makes it fun. I enjoy it. It's tough because it depends on what you weigh. You can't go wrong with either. I think personally, I'd probably lean Granville right now just because whenever I watch his tape and I watch him win on the outside, you see the first step. He's twitched up. He's got the bend that maybe Woods doesn't necessarily have right now. But I think both could really be high-level pass rushers for Penn State. But if I had to go with the guy right now, I'd probably lean Granville. But, man, that's probably one of the tougher calls of the cycle when it comes to evaluating two prospects in the same class.
Well, the beautiful thing about defensive end and the game of football is you get multiple guys out there in the field. We're not talking about a 2-quarterback class here. And in fact, we're talking about as it stands now, maybe a 4-man edge rusher class. And we'll get to why that's a little murky. But you've got the 2 guys that have come on board just since Monday and that we just discussed in depth. But remember, it feels like it was a long time ago, but Penn State picked up an edge rusher in Cortez Harris on Sunday evening. And, that was a significant pickup for Deion Barnes. And then the 4th name that we put in there, and we say kind of, sort of, because linebackers in play there, but Deshaun Burnett out of Pittsburgh's Amani Christian. And I'm just saying, I was on the fringe with this, and I talked to Brian Doan, national recruiting analyst, after Burnett committed, and we broke down, is he a Zariah Fisher type where he comes to campus for a year, plays linebacker, and then all of a sudden shows up as defensive end for his second spring ball. But when we saw him in person at that 7-on-7 tournament in early June, Tyler, I just have a hard time not just fast-tracking him right to Deion Barnes and saying, let's see what you can do at defensive end.
I think having the guys on board now on the edge that Penn State does have on board, it offers the staff a little bit more flexibility in what it wants to do with Burnett. If you want to keep him at linebacker, now you have those numbers in place on the edge. I think there's still very much a possibility that he lands on the edge. His physical development, I think, is very well going to take him in that direction. He's already pretty thick. But, again, if the Penn State staff deems linebacker the best spot for him now, you can do that without having to worry about, we don't have enough edges or we don't have enough bodies at the position, because that's not the case at this point. Harris, Woods, Granville puts Penn State in the position that it needs to be. And they would still welcome another edge rusher on board if the right opportunity presented itself. Zahir Mathis was on campus for an official visit last weekend, same time as Cortez Harris, and Penn State's going to remain involved there. So we're going to have to see what comes about on that front.
I mean, you want to talk about, putting your money where your mouth is, maybe for the Penn State staff and saying, Zahir, we'd like to have you, but we have other options. And then you follow that by picking up 3 commitments at the position. I'm not saying that's the conversation that was had, but Zahir Mathis wasn't exactly getting like a treatment. Like, we are not going to take any other edge rushers until you make your decision. There was no tiptoeing around Zahir Mathis. And I just think, as you mentioned, there's probably room for him at the end of the day, regardless of what's happening. And I'm not going to rule out the fact that Burnett maybe ends up under Tom Allen's watch for at least a year, and you see what he can do at linebacker. And if it works there, then all of a sudden you've got a really special specimen at the second level of your defense. This is a class now that has 19 commitments as we stand on Thursday afternoon. Remember, it was at 11 commitments on the morning of June 10th. Number 6 ranking nationally, number 2 among all Big Ten programs. And quite frankly, it's Ohio State at number 1. It's Penn State there at number 6. And then there's a pretty big gap. Rutgers is currently the 3rd team, followed by Wisconsin. It's an 18-team conference. There's a lot going on right now. But do you think Penn State has been able to separate itself? I think there's been some question about what this new era of the Big Ten is going to look like from a recruiting standpoint, from a competitive standpoint. You're bringing in some heavyweights from the West Coast. How is that going to throw everything in flux? It feels like in the past week, especially with these top 24/7 guys, and then you throw in Troy Hune, Penn State really pounding their chest a little bit, whether you want to talk about their NIL capabilities, which are on the rise, their coaching staff's abilities, or what they can offer as a program, because they're getting it done right now.
Now, I can only speak from my own experience. This has to be the hottest I've seen Penn State get on the trail since I've been on the beat. James Franklin has had some pretty impressive run of commitments in the past, but this just has to. I mean, we were talking about leading into today 6 commitments in 5 days, and we're talking about multiple top 24/7 prospects among that group. And then you go back even earlier in the month, you're getting a top 100 guy in Darius Dixon. You're getting another top 100 corner in Jameer Joseph. You're getting a borderline 4-star prospect in Antonio Branch. So you're hitting on a lot of really talented prospects. These aren't marginal prospects where we're sitting here talking about, why is he in the class? We're talking about guys who are really, really strong prospects, and it's pretty easy to identify their upside. So it's definitely going well for Penn State on the trail right now. I think that's just the best way to put it. And you also have to take into account there's a good chance there's more good news, coming on the trail for Penn State moving forward. There are still multiple top targets out there for the taking, and the Nittany Lions happen to be in a good spot with kind of a majority of those guys at this point.
You get the sense that, and we've seen this kind of annually now with the current recruiting calendar structure and the way Penn State has approached things, the class feels full a lot by the time this team gets to training camp. Like, by the time they're on the field with pads in August, it's basically a conversation of 2-3 spots maybe, and they got to be really good guys to fill those spots. So we'll see if they can get to that point. Obviously, the staff would prefer to, and there's decisions to come. A decision actually came this week, and Penn State fans have been spoiled, but not everything has gone in the Nittany Lions direction. Brandon Finney, for a while, felt like he was trending toward Happy Valley, a guy that the staff, and specifically Terry Smith, had built a strong relationship. You've discussed in the past some comparisons there to Joey Porter Jr., guy who could end up, top 100 talent, top 24/7 guy right now. Goes to Oregon. He's making a cross-country trip, ultimately, is his plan in 2025, from Maryland, the McDonough School, which has been a pipeline, out to join the Ducks. I think we got to keep tabs on this just because of the nature of the lack of proximity between him and his future campus. But this was a bit of a surprise, and we could be talking about an even hotter, if you can imagine, Penn State recruiting streak right now.
You kind of moved in the other way pretty quickly for Penn State. I mean, really going into the day, Penn State felt like the favorite, but Oregon made its late move as it tends to do on the recruiting trail. You've seen Oregon go from 0 to 100 with targets who are high on their board pretty quickly, and that happened here with Finney. We know Penn State's not going to go away with Finney. The Nittany Lions are going to continue to try with him, and when you factor in the geographical aspect of it, although some aspects of that were alleviated when Finney made it to Oregon for his official visit, Penn State is still the closer option. The relationships at McDonough are good, so Penn State's not going to give up on this one. They're not going to give up on Finney until he signs. So this is definitely one that we'll be tracking moving forward in the coming months. He's off the board to Oregon, though, and really no matter how you slice it, it's definitely a loss for Penn State. Nittany Lions have a great cornerback haul, but Finney would have taken things next level. He's a really, really good prospect. He's a great player. I've seen him in person. And Oregon, they're getting a good one.
It's one of those things like, oh, well, we'll try to catch him during his college career if he ends out in Oregon, have fun in the Pac-12. And then you're like, oh, wait, like he could be playing.
Now.
Yeah, we're going to see him in the conference. And it's a whole different reality now. And, if you missed it last week on our last Thursday episode, we had a conversation with our 24/7 Sports USC beat reporter about them coming on board and playing Penn State. And it keeps hitting you in different ways and getting reminded about the new reality of the Big Ten. Looking at the class, you can go through a lot of names at the top. This is how long you got to go to get to an offensive name. Darius Dixon, Jayden Woods, Max Granville, Jameer Joseph, Deshaun Burnett, and then you have Brady O'Hara, which is an interesting one because he's probably the offensive prospect that we know the least about in terms of what he's going to mean for Penn State long term. But my point is this is skewed defensively as things currently stand. And one of those big names that's been on the board for a long time at wide receiver is Jeff Exeter, also out of the McDonough school. He's got a decision coming on Friday. Is it really possible here in the 2025 cycle for as hot as Penn State is that they could go 0 for 2 at McDonough?
I'd lean no at this point, just more checking in throughout the day-to-day. Maryland definitely made a big push for Exeter coming out of its official visit. Terps did a really good job with him, but Penn State has been in contact with Exeter since that visit, and I think Penn State's still in the best spot to get this one done. The relationship with Kenny Sanders looms really, really large here in Penn State's favor, and Exeter has formed a pretty good relationship with Marcus Haynes throughout his process, and Penn State's done a pretty nice job of pitching Exeter on his potential role in Andy Kotelnicki's offense and how they'll get him the ball in that system. So I still lean Penn State at this point for Exeter. He's going to be going off the board 7 o'clock Eastern Friday night. It's funny because I just feel that the question on the board, why haven't we heard a lot of noise on offense, specifically at wide receiver? A lot of these guys just, frankly, they haven't announced yet. We're kind of getting into the thick of it with announcements, and I think Exeter could be one that definitely goes Penn State's way.
Yeah, there's a bunch of guys we talked about as pass catchers and that have been important to Penn State. Maybe no one as important in that regard as Andrew Olesh. Even though you are so stacked at the tight end position, this is an elite premium prospect at that spot, and he's in your home state. But reporting coming out of his official visit tour in June, now indicating, I believe it was was it Brian Doan who had the story? Yes. I don't want to misreport. Yeah, it's Brian Doan who he spoke with. Alabama and Michigan have separated themselves as he kind of huddles up for a decision that's he hopes to make here within the next week. That means that the two other schools he visited, Florida and Penn State, have not separated themselves. They've drifted back a bit. And so with that being said, barring a surprise where Penn State leapfrogs the other two favorites at this stage, what does it mean for the Nittany Lions class? And is another tight end still on the to-do list if Olesh isn't in the class?
He's a top 100 in-state guy. The staff really wanted, that's just kind of the facts of it. They loved Olesh as a prospect. They love who he is, and they would have loved to have him in this class. But they're really bullish on Matt Henderson's potential, the tight end prospect from Virginia, who's been in the class since a little bit earlier in the spring. And really, it's just a matter of Michigan did a really good job with Olesh during his official. Bama did a good job with Olesh during his official visit. And we didn't really get the sense, I think, coming out of his Penn State official visit, the Nittany Lions made as much of a move as those two programs. So does it surprise me if those two are the finalists? It really doesn't. Those two, they did well. Florida got an official from Olesh as well, and they didn't make the cut either. Bama and Michigan definitely trending here right now based on the reporting. And when it comes to Penn State and their tight end class moving forward with Henderson already on board, they've been chipping away at a two tight end class. I think Olesh is really the center of that conversation. There have been conversations elsewhere as well. We just saw another name who was popular in Penn State tight end recruiting circles for a little bit, Brody Lennon. He just went off the board to Ohio State. He was going to be in State College for an official visit during this last weekend of June, but he camped at Ohio State, got the offer, scrapped Penn State in favor of a visit to Columbus. And once Ohio State offered, he just kind of got the sense of where that one was going. He's a legacy. His father attended the school, so Buckeyes that get that one done, it's another potential name off the board. And like I said, there's conversations elsewhere as well at tight end. So that's kind of the state of things with Olesh trending elsewhere. But if Penn State winds up signing just one tight end and Henderson, they'll be fine with that.
And let's be real about it. There are many, many tight ends out there who would absolutely jump off a cliff to get a Penn State offer. I mean, they wouldn't have a hard time picking up a second tight end, but they have every right to be selective the way they have recruited there. Henderson is a developmental prospect. He's not a guy I think any fan should expect to come in and flash as a freshman. But let me give you a little more reminder here. Andrew Rapplier and Luke Reynolds both carry freshman eligibility here in 2024. So they're in a really good spot long-term and short-term at the tight end position. But no, can't sugarcoat it. Andrew Elish is a miss here in the cycle. Let's go to a guy that you can say that Olish was a major priority, but maybe no one's as important from a positional standpoint right now as Malachi Goodman. Top 24/7 offensive lineman out of Paramus Catholic. He is ready to choose between, well, he's not quite ready yet, but he is going to choose between Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Penn State, and USC. Told Brian Doan here this week that he's targeting a July-August commitment timeline, and also told him that he's done visiting these schools. He's made his official visits. He's made other visits in the past, and he thinks that the info and the homework and that chapter is over. So we're entering the final stretch with Malachi Goodman, and when you look around what's left on the offensive line board for Penn State, sure seems like an important piece of the puzzle here.
Oh, it's crucial. He's been the top guy on that offensive line board for an extended period of time now, and we've kind of reached a point in the cycle where with Max Buchanan committing to Miami on Wednesday night, he was on campus for an official visit over the weekend. We've kind of reached the point where Goodman's really the only relevant name because Penn State's not going to go out and reach on a guy that it's not sold on. So that makes Goodman kind of the whole board right now in a sense. He's definitely the center of the focus for Phil Charlton and the staff, and Penn State has fared well with him. It's been very clear to Goodman for a long time that he's a priority for this Penn State staff, and they want to get him on board. I think that has helped the Nittany Lions maintain staying power with him while the SEC has come calling, while USC on the West Coast has come calling. Auburn's done a pretty good job with Goodman. Kind of get the sense that Penn State and Auburn are probably the two fighting this one out the hardest right now. USC is very much involved as well, maybe a little bit less likely because of the West Coast element, but Penn State and Auburn they kind of offer a similar home feeling in a sense. But I think at Penn State, it's more of a regional option. The relationship with the staff is longer standing, and the Nittany Lions have put themselves in a position to fight this fight. And, the staff is hoping it comes out on the right side, but we're not going to have an answer to that until next month, at least, maybe even 2 months if he goes in August.
Penn State, 19 commitments on board. I think we've done our best to go in depth on who they all are, especially as of late. But I know, Tyler, you're going to have some recruiting board reset type stuff coming maybe early next week. We're going to do our best to do that here on the podcast too, because it's probably going to be time to catch our breath eventually, but the decisions aren't done. And Malachi Goodman is a really, really crucial one to follow deeper into the summer. Appreciate your perspective there, but we shift gears because Penn State basketball officially on the board with their 2025 class. And our segment will finish here. We'll have Daniel Gallen on in just a moment to break down the offensive depth chart for Penn State as we look ahead towards preseason camp. But let's get into it with this Nittany Lions edition on the court. It's an in-state pickup, and it's a big man.
Yeah, Justin Hauser from Phelps School. This is really an upside play for Penn State, and I don't think that should be viewed with a negative connotation or through a negative lens, because Hauser is essentially the modern-day big. He's a 7-footer who moves really well offensively. He's a lefty. He's got a nice stroke from three, so he could space the floor, stretch the floor. He's not going to be knocking threes down like crazy, but he's a threat from beyond the arc. And if you think about Penn State basketball and what Mike Rhodes is looking to accomplish, specifically on offense, one of the big reasons why he brought in Yannick Niederhauser out of the transfer portal from Northern Illinois was the desire to get a stretch big who could shoot threes, open things up offensively. That's essentially what Hauser is at this point. And again, I think he moves really well for a kid his size. I think he controls his body really well for a prospect, for a teenager at his size. He's going to have to fill out physically. There's no doubt about that. Defensively, that's where the physical development is going to be the biggest, because you can see the desire that he plays with. He wants to be physical and he wants to be aggressive, but he goes up against bigs who might be a little bit further along in their physical developments, and they'll beat him more times than not. So he's going to have to get stronger, and that's perfectly fine. Again, he's a 7-footer still filling out his frame. This is one Brent Scott wanted to get on board. Hauser didn't have a really impressive offer list. It was a lot of mid-major and low-major programs. Temple was probably the other biggest name on the sheet, but this is one Penn State really, really liked its evaluation. They like the developmental aspect here, and they think Hauser has plenty of upside that he could bring to the program. So factor in that he's an in-state guy, too. I don't think this is a bad way for Penn State to start its 2025 class. First get from Mike Rhodes and his guys.
Before we say goodbye, Mike Rhodes, I would say by most accounts exceeded expectations with how the team performed during that first year. They were right on the doorstep of the NIT, one game under 500. And I think perhaps even more importantly, building upon that, the continuity they now have in place. And our colleague Daniel Gallen has a story up on Thursday about that carryover from last year, the fact that a lot of guys opted in rather than hitting the transfer portal or trying to turn pro or doing whatever with their eligibility. And so I'm going to ask you on the recruiting trail, you've done a lot of college basketball recruiting coverage in the past. I think you have a pretty good gauge of at least this region. What is Mike Rhodes working with right now versus where he was this time last year when he was new to campus?
So anytime you could go out and have a decent first season, I know it didn't really translate in the sense that Penn State was playing in the postseason, and that's what some recruits will look at and see, because they want to be playing postseason basketball. It's just kind of how it is. But they can see the tangible strides that were made in year one. I think there's an understanding that Rhodes had to build his roster a certain way through the transfer portal in year one. It's a way that he has said himself that it's really not what he wants to do. He wants the lifeblood of his program to be high school recruiting and then using the portal to supplement needs. And you even saw his transfer portal approach this offseason. He was getting younger guys with multiple years of eligibility, kind of achieve a class balance, not just have veterans and then a bunch of freshmen running around. He wants to achieve balance. And I think he was able to do that with his transfer portal recruiting. Now you're starting to see some high school success. I mean, Penn State signed a top 25 class right off the bat in this first full cycle on board. So I think you're starting to see the recruiting chops of this staff shine through. I think Penn State's generating a little bit more buzz in the region as well. For the Nittany Lions to be in it with a top 100 point guard like Jayden Mingo, who plays in New York and has a pretty extensive offer list of regional options and programs who are more established as winners, I think you're starting to see not necessarily a shift because it's too early for that. And, again, tangible success needs to come. But Penn State is definitely generating more chatter in regional recruiting circles, in my opinion. And I think you're seeing it with a guy like Mingo being a perfect example where Penn State is going to get that official visit locked in. Jamal Brunt does a great job recruiting in the DMV for Penn State. So the Nittany Lions are going to be players for guys down there. You're seeing that with Cam Ward, who's a four-star prospect, who could very well wind up at Penn State for an official visit in either August or September. We have to see how his timeline and his schedule winds up playing out. But I think you're going to see Penn State be a factor in recruiting with this staff. And they scored some pretty big wins in year one. There were some signature wins on that schedule. And if you could continue stockpiling that in year two, go on the road, win some Big Ten games and make some noise, beating a team like Illinois in year one, it sends some waves. I know it's one game, but it definitely sends some waves that it's a program on the upswing. And I think you're starting to see the recruiting efforts reflect that.
The versatile Tyler Calvaruso, he can do basketball, he can do football, he can talk about them both here for us. And we're not going to talk to you again until July. So I just want to say, man, you crushed it.
Don't say that, man. You never know these days.
I don't plan on recording a podcast this week.
I'll talk to myself then. It's fine.
Well, we'll see. But I don't think we will hear from you again until July. So I want to tip my cap to you and make sure our listeners understand that as well. The work you put in this month was outrageous. We really appreciate it. I know our members do at the site. And you absolutely crushed it, man. So thank you.
I appreciate that, man. It's always a team effort, man. Everyone does a great job here, and I appreciate it. Definitely means a lot. So we're going to keep this thing rolling, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more for you guys here pretty soon. My last note here, and I think a lot of listeners are going to appreciate this one. You are following in the footsteps of me, Tyler Donahue, and transplanting yourself from the Garden State of New Jersey to Pennsylvania. You're crossing that border in July. Welcome to Pennsylvania. We'll put that out there too. Yep, I'll be one of you guys here soon. I'm looking forward to it. I'm in the process, so pretty soon this background that you see if you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be a little bit more, I guess, better. It's going to be less bland. Hopefully, we'll see. Let's continue this episode of the Lions 247 podcast by
Going to Daniel Gallen, our colleague at Lions247.com, and we are only about 5 weeks away from getting back onto the Penn State practice fields for the start of preseason camp. Ready or not, Penn State media beat, it's almost time to get back into it. We're going to do a bit of an exercise on this episode, do our best here at midsummer to piece together what we think the projected depth chart is going to look like when preseason camp does open. Now, there's some injuries in play there. There's some newcomers who we're still trying to sort through what exactly their role will be. But Daniel, the time is now. Prospect camps are behind us. June is wrapping up. And when you look ahead, you still got Lash Bash. That's a big recruiting event in late July. But coaches are going to take some time, maybe get a little vacation. Players are going to get home, maybe unwind a little bit. But ultimately, this is now a moving sidewalk. It's getting faster by the day, and it's going to lead us into preseason camp that first week of August.
I mean, every single day on Lions 24/7, we see that countdown to kickoff just get lower and lower and lower. And August 31st is going to be here before we know it. Media day in early August, that'll be here before we know it. And so it's a good time to kind of see where things stand right now. Maybe give ourselves a little bit of a refresher with the roster and kind of set the stage maybe for some position battles, some intrigue, and everything else that comes along with the territory.
Yeah, we're about a month away, less than that now, from flying out to Indianapolis for Big Ten Media Days. That's basically the final tune-up before we get to see this team on the field. We'll get in front of James Franklin, some players. There'll be 18 different Big Ten conference representations out there, but that's still a ways off. So we're working off of the information gathered through conversations with staff members, things we observed during spring practice, and also just applying logic from covering this team for several seasons now. And we're going to begin on offense. It's worth noting, as usual, that both sides of the ball have a new coordinator working at the top of that pecking order with the coaching staff. On offense, it's Andy Kotelnicki, made the move from Kansas in December. He was named the 247 Sports Offensive Coordinator of the Year last year. So pretty splashy pickup for James Franklin. And naturally, the quarterback room, it's not under his guidance. We're used to that, Daniel, where the offensive coordinator also wears the hat of quarterbacks coach around here. That's not the case anymore. You've got Andy Kotelnicki as the offensive mastermind, and then you've got Danny O'Brien working intimately with those quarterbacks. Kotelnicki, very much involved with the process with the QBs, very much involved with recruiting the quarterbacks. But this is a different dynamic in place. Before we get to the components of this room, the structure of leadership, although Danny O'Brien's been around the program for multiple seasons, it does have a different feel here in 2024.
I think we got a good look at that during prospect camps, where over the past couple of years, when Mike Yurcich was the offensive coordinator, we pretty much only saw him with the quarterbacks over the course of those afternoons over at the Lash Fields. Every once in a while, if there was like a particular prospect who was getting put through the paces or that someone else was evaluating individually, he might go over there and watch that. But it felt like mostly Yurcich was with the quarterbacks. That was kind of his domain. With Andy Kotelnicki there, we kind of saw him looking at a little bit of everything over the course of a camp, whether that was linemen, tight ends, receivers, spent, a decent amount of time with the quarterbacks. But when it was quarterback time, I mean, that was Danny O'Brien. That's who was kind of leading things. That's who these campers were working under. And so I think that's kind of a little bit of a preview of how things could go. I know that we saw a little bit of that in the spring too. But it's going to be an interesting structure. O'Brien still has still a graduate assistant technically, and added those quarterbacks responsibilities. And I'm really interested to see what this looks like. I think that we've heard so much about the excitement from him, both as a recruiter, as a coach, as kind of a strategist. And I think that we'll really get that now with him having that full quarterbacks coach, a title and everything. So it's going to be an interesting room. I mean, there's talent in it. And so we'll see how O'Brien molds it and how that fits in with Andy Kotelnicki does.
Danny O'Brien had a role in acquiring every single quarterback in this room. Andy Kotelnicki did not have a role in bringing any of them on board to campus, and he has gained steam in getting to know them since December. He said a lot of good things about Drew Aller over the course of spring ball and now into summer, as recent as late June, and talking about his insatiable hunger to improve and his ability to look in the mirror, which isn't always so easy for quarterbacks, particularly coming from that five-star pedigree. And we're not going to go give a player profile on every single guy in every one of these position rooms. This is more of an experiment to look at the competitive battles that are brewing in spots. And so we know who QB1 is, Daniel. It's Drew Aller, 25 touchdown passes, 2 interceptions last year. And as we've said time and time again, that doesn't quite reflect the body of work that he put out as a first-year starter. 3 games that they lost, under 50% completion percentage, 2 of those on the largest stages that Big Ten conference play was going to offer them in 2023. Naturally, when you shift away from the quarterback coach and offensive coordinator who actively recruited you to campus and spent the first 2 seasons with you on campus, there's going to be some changes. So we're all looking ahead to what Drew Aller that might entail. I think we've all noted, fans out there have noted it, he looks trimmer this year. There has been some discussion from Chuck Losey, the strength coach, from different members of the staff about the important nature of having a mobile quarterback with what they want to do. Does that mean they're going to run Drew Aller like he's Trace McSorley? No, but there needs to be a threat presented there, and there's certainly a threat presented by who we are projecting as QB2, Daniel, and Beau Pribula. Andy Kotelnicki told us a couple of weeks ago that he views Pribula as one of the most impressive weapons in this offense. And just looking around, guys who are ballers, he views Pribula in that kind of a light because of his that athletic, holds him in very high athletic regard, but not much about his passing ability from Andy Kotelnicki to this point. So those are the 2 guys that we expect to see in game action. The question really is, how early, how often is Beau Pribula involved as a redshirt sophomore, and what exactly is he doing?
Yeah, I think that's something that has really carried over from last year, given how much James Franklin teased the involvement of Pribula with the game plan, and then that not really coming to fruition in the 2 biggest games of the season. I think that's something that has really stood out, as time has gone on, and we saw what Andy Kotelnicki did at Kansas with the combination of Jalen McDaniels and Jason Bean and any other quarterback. He had a couple on the field at a time, and usually found success with that. And so, I think that's kind of what we're going to look at. The one note on Aller, he was listed at 238 on the latest roster update. And I went back, and I am pretty sure that this is the first time he's been listed under 240 since his first spring here in spring 2022. I believe he was announced at 225 on signing day. He was at 229 that spring, and then in summer 2022, he was up into the 240s, and that's where he stayed. So, I think that people have talked about seeing it, and seeing him be a little bit more trim, and that's reflected in that in the official roster weight. But yeah, I think that these top 2 are pretty locked in. It's just almost a question of how much are they going to share the field together.
Yeah, they came in together in January of 2022. Aller, of course, burned red shirt, unlike Pribula, so now he's a junior. And then beyond those 2, the QB3 conversation is about a couple players carrying freshman eligibility, the red shirt Jackson Smolik, and then the true freshman Ethan Grunkemeyer, who got to campus in January, got through all of spring ball. Not just got through spring ball, Daniel, but he was able to really benefit from a rough situation for Jackson Smolik. We don't know the details, but Smolik was unable to complete spring practices due to an injury. We learned that he would miss a significant period of time. Does that mean he's not out there throwing passes in August? We'll wait to get there. But naturally, this has opened the door for Ethan Grunkemeyer to put himself not just in play to be on the travel roster, but to really be, if something happens with one of the top 2 guys, he could really be in a situation where Andy Kotelnicki, Danny O'Brien have to have the trust to put him, insert him inside of a live action game.
Yeah, when I was doing this exercise earlier today, I went ahead and penciled in Grunkemeyer as the 3, just because, with Smolik, I believe he is another one that's been out indefinitely. That's been the language used around all the injuries this spring, which, I think that if you're the coaching staff and you're Penn State, that's the word that you want to use, because it doesn't tie you into any timeline. For us, we'd like to know, we'd like to have a timeline, like to know a little bit more, but it's not really how things are going to work. But, I think that Grunkemeyer just had a great opportunity this spring, and we got good feedback on him. And, we'll see where Smolik is physically by the time we get to August, by the time we get around to September. But I think Grunkemeyer is in a really nice spot, to be in that number 3 spot. Obviously, some of it has to do with Smolik, but given the type of prospect that Grunkemeyer was, and kind of the early feedback that we got from him a little bit, he seemed like that, all things being equal, he could have pushed, to be in this position anyway.
And it sounds like Ronkemeyer was able to get through the chaotic portion of hitting a Power 5 practice field and dealing with all the defenders and even your own teammates moving just at a different pace and the coaching staff demanding new things of you. And by the time he got through spring ball, was really able to be in command a bit more, as much as you can be as a first semester freshman. And we quietly heard some nice things about Jackson Smolik and what he put together behind the scenes his first year on campus. His deep ball was something that was kind of a topic of conversation whenever his name came up. But when you miss these spring practices and you open the door for a talent like Ethan Grunkemeyer, you've got some catching up to do. You've got some rust to knock off down the road. It'll be something we watch closely as this team regroups in August. Moving over to running back, it's a situation much like this where there's two names that we know we're going to see involved and probably a lot more than we'll see two quarterbacks involved. But Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, and then the conversation gets a little trickier. But let's start at the top. I mean, we spoke with Nick Singleton over at Lift for Life just a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, I don't quite know if he realizes, and we asked him this, I feel like every time, how unique and special the fact that him and Katron Allen have a 3-year partnership in modern college football, where you've got guys looking for bigger pieces of the pie, whether it's bigger piece of the pie in the playbook or a bigger piece of the pie in the NIL conversation. And yet here these guys are, both have their statistics. Neither have had, you know, bell cow moments where they're asked to carry the ball 30 times a game, but the wear and tear has been limited for them. They've been available. They've made it work. And through it all, and I mean, let's face it, there have been tampering allegations, and you better believe that these running backs are targeted in those tamper allegations. They're still here. They're going to hit their 3rd preseason camp together. And I think it speaks volumes about their mindsets and really what Jaywan Sider has established in that room during the course of his career, which goes back to 2018. I have to remind myself sometimes how long he has been on campus.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the running backs and having these two guys partnered at the top, you know, this is one of those positions where you can really do that and, you know, create that balance and create that kind of partnership. You know, quarterback, obviously, there's just one on the field at all times. Receivers, you know, you can have a couple on the field, but a lot of that is kind of predicated on your quarterback, your game plan. You know, there's a lot that goes into it, but you know, I think that running back, it's kind of counterintuitively, I think that it is a position where you can keep multiple guys happy for a long period of time in this current environment, just because you can, you know, get guys the ball and then you put the carrot out there that you want to be fresh when you get to the NFL. NFL teams don't want to see you necessarily coming in with, you know, I don't know, like 3 250 carry seasons or, you know, 4 250 carry seasons, something like that. So I think that Penn State is just very, you know, nicely positioned right now at the top of their running back depth chart. And I'm excited to see what that looks like.
And I mean, it's tough to wrap your head around Nick Singleton, because this time last year we were talking about him maybe being a dark horse Heisman Trophy kind of contender after being Big Ten Freshman of the Year. And then it took a long time. It really, in fact, took until Mike Yurcich lost his job for us to really see Nick Singleton in full effect and getting loose and big moments. It happened against Michigan State. It happened certainly in the Peach Bowl, and he put together a really strong finish. And meanwhile, Katron Allen feels like Mr. Consistent from game 1 of his career to game 26 of his career. But I know that something both of these guys are excited about beyond the potential to share the field together. Remember, last time we saw them, they were both actually starting. We've called them co-starters, but they never actually started together except for that Peach Bowl. But they have both hinted strongly, Daniel, that there's going to be opportunities to see them in other roles beyond the backfield as pass targets. And I think it's something they're very excited with Andy Kotelnicki. And I think that segues really nicely into the next couple of names, because you talk about versatility, and Quentin Martin has been described as this really exciting Swiss Army knife piece for this backfield and for this offense. And just hearing Jaywan Sider really rave about what they have in Quentin Martin, and going from a player that, you know, this time last year when he was coming to camps, they weren't sure if he was going to be, you know, the next Micah Parsons at linebacker or a cornerback or a safety or a wide receiver, which they certainly feel like he could play. But he proved to be a running back. And in those camp circuits, he showed that to Jaywan Sider. But he went out and caught about 800 receiving yards as a senior, leading his team to a state championship victory. He had 1,000 yards rushing. But this is truly someone, Daniel, that if we were talking about him on the receiver depth chart or the running back depth chart, I'm not sleeping on him. And he missed some time in the spring. And so that's a little bit of a hurdle for him to clear. I wonder what we might be discussing now if he had an entire spring, but he finished it off with a couple touchdown runs in the blue-white game. Everything we've heard about him is how far he's advanced fundamentally and technically. And we know where he's at in terms of what he's got in his arsenal from a versatility standpoint. We saw it firsthand last year at team facilities in a couple different camps. So to me, I'm burying Cam Wallace a little bit, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. But there's so much intrigue about what he can do. And at a lot of schools, I think you have to turn to Quentin Martin as a primary ball handler for you in your backfield pretty early. But when you show up and you got juniors Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, it's a really nice situation to get a feel for what you have in preseason camp. Maybe he develops into a really dangerous gadget type player for you in the regular season. And then he's ready to blossom in 2025 when it feels like all bets are going to be off in the running back conversation with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton likely to move on.
Yeah, I think when you look at Quentin Martin, it's in this backfield. I mean, there's only one ball to go around, and Nick Singleton and Katron Allen are going to get theirs. So you kind of try to figure out where he and Cam Wallace could come in. But I think the one thing that they have going for them is that Andy Kotelnicki doesn't really strike me as the type of offensive coordinator, the type of play caller who's going to forget about guys, who is going to allow talented players to disappear for stretches, which is something that you see every now and again. So I'm excited to see how they use Quentin Martin. I thought that he looked like he belonged out there in the blue-white game, even with missing time in the spring. And we'll see what that looks like when it's full speed. The full playbook. How he's being used.
And by the way, I mean, I mentioned him, but Cam Wallace deserves to be right there front and center in that conversation beyond Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. I got a little excited talking about the new arrival, but let's face it. I mean, in our defense, Cam Wallace has as many college carries as Quentin Martin does, right? And even though he was on campus for a full calendar year at this point, we still don't know what it looks like when he lines up against Big Ten opponents. But we do know, I mean, what it looked like when he lined up against Penn State defenders in the blue-white game. Very physical, and that's an aspect of his game that has really come on during his second year on campus. And it sounds like he really was able to find confidence during the second, third week, midway point of spring ball, and he never relinquished it. And it carried over through the blue-white game in front of a Beaver Stadium crowd. And we've called that a glorified practice, but I think for a guy like Cam Wallace to go out there and deliver some moments and look the part in that kind of a setting, it means a little bit more. And so as much as we can rave about the versatility of Quentin Martin, the availability wasn't always there for him in March and April. It was there for Cam Wallace. He came through the other end, I think, as a favorite for the number 3 job. I don't think there's much distance there. I don't know if there's any distance there in terms of a gap between him and Quentin Martin, but really excited to see Cam Wallace, because when you talk to Jaywan Sider again, he describes a freshman who was an athlete in every sense of the word last year. And now he's describing a redshirt freshman who has found a home at running back. And I'll remind our listeners, they brought this guy in with a contingency plan. He was the second running back. They brought him in after they already had a commitment from London Montgomery, who's now at East Carolina. And they did so knowing that if they had a fallback and he wasn't really a fit for running back and it wasn't the right future for him, there were other options, receiver, defensive back, but he has found that fit. So those are the two guys battling beyond Nick Singleton and Katron Allen that we're really expecting to see in August. And again, could mean a lot more than RB3 this year. Could mean a lot for next year. And we have to mention Corey Smith got to campus. He's going to be in a developmental kind of phase right now, trying to keep his head on straight and get on the field and with everything moving fast around him. So more of a back burner name, a guy to file away for next year. But Corey Smith also comes to town with a 4-star pedigree. And I guess that kind of puts it in perspective where you can kind of file a name away despite that highly rated recruit just because of what they already have in this room right now.
Yeah, I set my board up almost exactly the same as you did, with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen sharing line 1, Cam Wallace and Quentin Martin sharing line 2, and then Corey Smith after that. I think Cam Wallace might be I'll have to think about a wide receiver, but I think Cam Wallace might be the player I'm most excited to see on the field this year. To finally see it in action, to kind of try to square what we've heard and what we've seen a little bit in practice with how that looks in game action against Big Ten competition. I'm really excited to see what he can bring to this offense.
You mentioned wide receivers. I think we've avoided the subject long enough, my friend. Let's dive in. And let's also put this out there. We don't know that the base offense for Penn State is going to feature 3 wide receivers. We just don't know that yet. We talked about the talent and some of the different things they might be able to do in that running back room. We'll get to the tight ends in a moment, but we know that they have really flourished at times in 2 tight end sets, and they have the talent there. Again, it would seem to be able to rely upon adding a second tight end on the field with regularity. So with that out of the way, let's start with the outside wide receiver positions. And I think the one that I'm ready to put the crown on as a starter and feel really good about it is Harrison Wallace. You know, we've heard about Trey Wallace now for a couple different years where he was a popular breakout pick. I think we were all on board with that last year. And the more we learned about him last year, the more comfortable you felt. He goes out there, 7 receptions in the season opener, but has a bout with injury in September, has another run-in with injuries later on in the season, and we never really get to see him fully healthy. But when he's out there, it's clear that him and Drew Aller have a connection. He led the team in catches in the first game and the last game. He found the end zone late against Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl, and he's just somebody that I almost wish we just had more. I wish we had practice footage. I shouldn't say more. We have no practice footage, but I wish I could see the highlight reel of what Harrison Wallace has done on the practice field with Penn State the last couple of summers, the last couple of springs, because we had guys like Theo Johnson. We had defenders telling us that he looked like the #1 wide receiver coming out of preseason camp last year. He looked like that guy to me in the spring game. I thought he really, when he was kind of starting to take over there a little bit at different points, he was clearly the favorite pass target that Drew Aller was looking for out in Beaver Stadium in April. So Harrison Wallace, to me, and James Franklin said it, they need him to have a big year. And this is, as a redshirt junior now with, I think, fewer than 600 career receiving yards, you're reaching a point where you're veering on myth versus being a real full-fledged college standout. And so I hope for his sake and certainly for Penn State's offense's sake that he's able to bridge that gap and really show the world what he has shown this team in facilities the last few years.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think we talked about it a lot last year after Wallace got hurt, and kind of the discussion around what his absence meant is that there's been a lot of we need some show, don't tell when it comes to Harrison Wallace. We need to see it. We've heard enough about it, but I was in the same boat as you in kind of putting together what this might look like. I had him at the in an unquestioned spot I kind of did like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I didn't necessarily divide it up by outside and slot, but I had Wallace at the top of that.
And then everyone wants to know about Julian Fleming. We want to know about Julian Fleming. I think one thing we certainly have learned is he has made a positive impact on campus since he got here. He's emerged as that leader he hoped he would be, the guy that we heard a lot about at Ohio State. A 20-game starter there with the Buckeyes. The production didn't come, surrounded in a room by first-round talent in the NFL draft. And ultimately now he lands here, final year. I'm not quite ready to say he's going to be a starter. I know people probably penciled him in as soon as he got here to campus, but I'm looking at Liam Clifford as well on the outside. Omari Evans is another name. But to me, Liam Clifford, we've heard a lot of the similar tones regarding Clifford and his leadership role and kind of the guy who's out at the front and trying to set the pace for this group. And they've hit the reset button a little bit because of some of the people they've lost, because of some of the people they've brought in. They have hit the reset button from a cultural standpoint, from a leadership standpoint. So it sounds like Liam Clifford and Julian Fleming have emerged. And what is intriguing to me about Liam Clifford, aside from the fact that he's Sean's younger brother and we've been waiting to see what he's going to do at Penn State, is he's got the ability and they will use him outside and inside. So he's somebody that I think he could end up starting games in the slot. He could end up starting games outside. There'll be games where he doesn't start. And I just think overall, he may be a guy that among the fans, probably among the media, is flying too under the radar versus the reality of what he's going to mean for this offensive attack.
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit too, in terms of in the media settings, you look at what Penn State does sometimes, and Liam Clifford was made available after the blue-white game, and he's speaking for a wide receiver group that was much maligned. Didn't have Keandre Lambert-Smith that day, and what was happening with Lambert-Smith wasn't public yet. And to put him out there, I think that kind of shows what they think of him, as a leader and also as a player. I think we've heard some of that feedback about him as a leader continue. But as a player, I mean, it is, I am curious to see where he does end up finding a home. I do think they're going to move him around and use him in different spots, but it's the type of thing where if, say, Caden Saunders is coming along really well in the slot, you can move Liam Clifford to the outside. If Julian Fleming really seizes an outside job, you can use Liam Clifford in the slot. I think that gives them a little bit of flexibility in this upper tier of wide receivers.
And then again, Omari Evans, it's just hard to figure out who he is. I mean, he burned redshirt as a freshman. He was the only one of 5 freshman receivers back in 2022. You remember he was being utilized on the game-winning drive at Purdue week 1. And you're like, okay, well, Omari Evans is clearly going to be a guy here. We thought that going into last year. And then he was a little banged up. And then even when the snaps were there, he didn't seem to be getting the targets. And he just, chalk it up as one of the many mysteries from that receiver room in 2023. Once they fired Mike Yurcich, here we go again. All of a sudden, Omari Evans is popping up, catching passes, racing down the field, and he's a big play threat. And so much about him has been former high school quarterback, elite speed, big time tracking skills if he can go get the ball. And so what does that mean this year? I don't know. He may be the guy that blows up the kind of wide receiver conversation in a positive way, because if he shows up, I think a lot of people have just maybe put him to the side or just kind of forgotten about him. I think he's right there and pushing to play a lot, not just in the 2 deep, maybe to get some starts over the course of this season. And then you go beyond him, third-year guys who have done literally nothing in game action to this point, and Tyler Johnson and Anthony Ivy. We've heard some good things about both of them at different points of their careers here at different stages. Johnson wasn't available for much of last season. So those guys are lurking as well. And then you throw in the freshmen. And when you're talking about guys on the perimeter, I've said it before, Peter Gonzalez with his physical frame, they were really, really excited about how he showed up to campus from that perspective. And so I think if he can go out there, play aggressive, play assertive, win some matchups against a really talented cornerback group, he could be someone who pushes and pushes and pushes his way toward a perimeter opportunity. And Josiah Brown and Mekhi Flowers are just two that I'm going to kind of put in their own category here, because we didn't see them in spring ball. They were both recovering from injury issues, and neither of them have actually, I haven't seen either of them play wide receiver for Penn State in any capacity, because Mekhi Flowers spent the last couple of years at safety. Josiah Brown just got here from high school. So those guys, I'm not going to take a big leap and say, here's what they're going to be. But that's kind of how I'm viewing that perimeter area, the outside area, some of the different names and kind of loose ends out there before we go over to the slot.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I mean, I think Omari Evans is a really, really intriguing player coming into this year, into year 3. I think that he's another one who, theoretically should benefit a lot from Andy Kotelnicki and kind of the approach of, finding what guys do best and then maximizing that, emphasizing that. We'll see, what this looks like in practice, but I was just really impressed with him as a freshman, and last year, I think, remains kind of a mystery of what happened, but we saw how he closed the year. You can kind of see the things that Penn State likes about him, and it's just the key of projecting it forward a little bit.
Let's talk about the slot position. It was an area that we thought we'd see a bunch of Keandre Lambert-Smith if he remained with the team. Obviously, he did not. That means, again, Liam Clifford, big factor there. But Caden Saunders, can he take that next step? You look at that 22 class, guys who are going into year 3. It's hard not to spotlight Caden Saunders as somebody who can really make a name for himself this year, validate some of that hype that made him a top 100 overall prospect. And punt return situation is one thing. It seems to be having a good footing there. Daquan Hardy moving on to the NFL. But where's his confidence level as a pass target? He's had some run there. He caught a late touchdown at Ohio State after the game was already decided. And then the next week he was kind of put back on the shelf. And he's somebody that I'm looking forward to, and I'm anticipating this being the case. What does it look like for Caden Saunders when there's consistent opportunity? When he's getting at least 25 to 30 snaps, game in, game out, he can start to get a sense for who he is at the power 4 level. You hope that happens over the course of September when there's some of the more manageable matchups, and then you can dial in more when you hit the harder stretch of your schedule. But there's not going to really be room for hiccups here for Caden Saunders, because I look at who's ahead of him or who's with him there on the depth chart, and what they trust in Liam Clifford, and then I think about who might be nipping at his heels eventually, and a guy like Tyseer Denmark, who could come here and if he's as polished as he has looked at times, and as we have heard at times, then he may be making a case with a month of work on the practice field to get himself involved at the slot position. So Caden Saunders, to me, is really one of those guys who's a central figure in where the pendulum swings at the receiver spot, because if he's not prepared to step up, then that slot position, really the dynamics change. And if he is prepared to step up, then he's the exact player that Andy Kotelnicki has exploited opponents with, down the seam with misdirection, getting him in space. And I think Caden Saunders could absolutely go bonkers with opportunities in the open field in this offensive setting. But he's got to go out and do it. He's got to go out and prove it to himself before he can prove it to us.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that Saunders is someone who can really benefit from this offense. I think that he's someone that we know has that kind of speed and shiftiness that he can be used horizontally and stress defenses that way. I want to see what that looks like. And then, yeah, I agree. Tyseer Denmark is, someone too. I mean, I think that we're kind of looking at, kind of anyone, anywhere who can step up at wide receiver, looking at Peter Gonzalez and Josiah Brown, like what might they be able to do? But I think that Denmark has that short area quickness, was super productive in high school and made some plays. I think that kind of stuff can translate. And I think that a lot of this is going to be how consistently does Andy Kotelnicki keep these guys on the field, and what kind of position does he put them in to succeed?
Tight end, very different conversation. At the very top of the board, you've got a guy who is getting All-American, certainly all Big Ten projections as a fifth-year senior in Tyler Warren. Really nice season last year, splitting that starting role with Theo Johnson, and not splitting, but sharing the starting role. And Tyler Warren went out 7 touchdowns, had a huge game in the Peach Bowl, and it's really set up for him now to emerge as one of the premier names in college football at this position. Chuck Losey told us a couple weeks ago he thinks Tyler Warren by the end of the season is going to go down as an all-timer at Penn State at the tight end spot. And that's saying a lot considering the talent they've had come through here. But as we said, this is a 2 tight end plan that's worked pretty well for Penn State over the years. And they've had a lot of talent. They've had the talent to do it. Looks like they still do. And it's a battle between a guy that we've seen flashes from, Khalil Dinkins. He's been a big target for whatever reason on 4th downs. He kept surfacing, and all he does is catch touchdowns and move the chains on 4th down so far in his career. But he has come a long way in his physical development since he got to campus, and we know that he's more prepared as a blocker. That was something that we were told a lot last year during the offseason. And he got run as a 3rd tight end, but he never got a huge sustained amount of work. And so that's what it might take. And you wonder if Andrew Rapplier is going to be in a position to kind of nudge him out, leapfrog him a little bit in terms of the veteran nature of that position room. And as a redshirt freshman, sees a real large opportunity. And Andrew Rapplier, I've said it before, I think if he goes into a lot of different tight ends rooms last year, he's playing a bunch of snaps, he's burning his red shirt, and he's probably going to improve along the way. It had to happen on the practice field last year, and now it's happening on the spring practice field. And I think what you hear about him is a relentless competitor, hates losing reps, and is very much embraced what it requires from a Big Ten tight end in the blocking department. He did that in high school. Part of that reason he transferred to a prep school was to get more work in a particular offense where he could block. And that's what he's going to have to do here. And we know he's a really smooth route runner, a guy who has soft hands, and we've seen it a bit on the practice fields. We definitely saw it in the blue-white game when he was the primary tight end, with Tyler Warren getting that veteran day off, I guess you could call it. But this is one of those competitions that I think, however it ends up, you're in a good spot because the guy will have earned it. But it's going to be really important for Penn State, I think, to when they make this call, to keep using the 3rd guy, keep him fresh, because whether it's injury, whether it's performance, I think all 3 of those guys, Warren, Rapplier, and Dinkins, are going to have significant roles for tight end. And then I think you work your way through some of the others. And there's some what ifs there, but I just don't think it feels as concrete as we stand here in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different than 2 years ago when you had Brenton Strange, Theo Johnson, and Tyler Warren all set for that 2022 season. But I think the one thing that Mike Yurcich did a really nice job of was using that 3rd tight end, was keeping him involved, whether that was Tyler Warren in 2021, whatever combination in 2022, or even Dinkins last year, putting him out there in certain sets and giving him certain jobs. So I think that no matter how that shakes out between Rapplier and Dinkins, I had it set up in a similar way too, with Tyler Warren on his own line and then Rappleyea and Dinkins sharing that 2 spot. Whoever ends up in that 3rd spot is going to see the field, but I do think that each brings kind of an interesting thing, and I think that Rappleyea is in a position that he could really, really make a name for himself this year.
He told us on this podcast before he enrolled that he wanted to be the next star tight end at Penn State, and I think he will get a shot here this fall as a redshirt freshman to really begin to prove that narrative to Penn State fans. The others that are involved there, Jerry Cross, he's been around now for 3 years. You heard some good things from Ty Howell about Cross from this spring, but it's just still hard because Cross isn't just trying to work into that top 3. He's trying to battle back the younger rising talents. Joey Schlafer, I can tell you what, he looks way different physically than he did last year when he was kind of a thin, converted wide receiver. He's looking the part now of a Big Ten tight end. And then Luke Reynolds. You want to talk about growing up in a hurry? He went from 215 to about 240 during the last 5-6 months. I think that's what you told us in speaking with Ty Howell. So that is a big jump for Luke Reynolds because he has receiving skills that are just really unparalleled among a lot of peers. That's why he was the #1 tight end recruit in the country in the 2024 cycle. But can you round that out with enough ability to go block, to protect your quarterback, to create lanes for your running backs? Because if you are a hindrance in that regard, it's going to get weighted and balanced, and you're probably not going to see the field. But talk about Quentin Martin being a gadget play. Luke Reynolds could be a gadget play, and he doesn't have to go out and win some kind of game role for himself in August, Daniel. It's a long season. If you want to play in the college football playoff, we're talking about, games going all the way to December. Games going all the way to Christmas time. So you've got games stacking up on themselves, and you've got 4 games to use. So Luke Reynolds could be a really fun – he's probably going to be the guy that we keep mentioning in like October and November and be like, could he pop up? Could he pop up in this game? Because he is that kind of a high ceiling, wow factor prospect. But I just don't know what it looks like for him as a complete tight end to this stage.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an uphill climb for Luke Reynolds, but I think I would be pretty confident that we're going to see him on the field this fall. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he was somehow able to work his way up into a role, maybe leapfrog some guys who have been here already. And, we'll be looking down and we'll see number 85 out there. I think that, Luke Reynolds I think the fact that he developed physically as much as he did over the spring, I think that gives you, a lot of confidence that, maybe you could see a little bit more out of him instead of, writing him off as that, oh, he's a wide receiver converting. He needs to do all this stuff. It's going to be a redshirt year. I think that Luke Reynolds is positioning himself to have it maybe be a little bit more than that, which I think if you're a Penn State fan is an exciting possibility.
Let's get over to the offensive line where they have to replace 3 starters, 3 NFL draft picks, including an All-American at left tackle, and that's where our focus will land first. You got Drew Shelton now fully cleared to get back to practice action. He's already doing what he can right now before they put the pads back on, but far and away the most experienced offensive tackle in this group, 700-plus career snaps, 5 starts in the 2022 season. He started the Peach Bowl as well, although he was playing through an injury, which he had taken care of, and then that cost him the spring ball. So Drew Shelton, to me, if he's there all spring and he's just kind of building off of what he's done the first couple of years, I think you'd feel pretty good about him being the starting left tackle. But I think you got to put the slash there right now with Jayden Williams, because James Franklin made it a point as soon as he was talking about Drew Shelton being good to go. He said, but Jayden Williams is also going to get his opportunities. Jayden Williams was the primary left tackle for Penn State's offense during spring camp. We saw that in the blue-white game where he got a ton of work on the blind side of Drew Aller. And so the former 5-star in year 2, let's remember his high school offense didn't pass the ball. They ran it and ran it and ran it. So the pass protection aspect has been a big jump for Jayden Williams during the last year and a half. But he's going to have a chance to go out there and maybe put a rotation in play, maybe win the job outright if Drew Shelton has a lot of rust to knock off. But this is going to be a competition. And for Jayden Williams, who spent last year, a lot of it behind the scenes, played 3 games. It sounds like he took opportunity of what was there for him this spring, got about 600 practice snaps. And I think he's done what he can to this point to make Drew Shelton sweat through August. Oh, hold on, Daniel. You were muted there. Start again for us.
All right, we got it now finally. I was hearing some little ambient noise outside, so I wanted to cut that off. But yeah, I think you look at this left tackle battle, and it's potentially very intriguing. And I think that Shelton, who's a former top 24/7 prospect who has that experience from his freshman season. You've got Jayden Williams, a five-star prospect. Both guys were in the state of Pennsylvania and were very highly ranked and very well regarded. And this is kind of what you recruit that level of guy for. You want to put them in these environments where they're competing with each other. They have huge shoes to fill in Olu Fashanu. That's going to be a shadow that I think is over that position for much of the season. It's maybe unfair to compare these guys to Olu, but that's how it's going to work. In some respects. But I'm just really interested to see what it does and to get this kind of longer look at Jayden Williams and kind of see where Shelton's made improvements. I think that those are a couple of things that could be, this is a position that can really, shift the fortunes of a team. And so I want to see how that looks. But I think that in terms of, making a call in terms of a depth chart right now, I think we're going to have to wait a little bit. And even then, when we get to the season, we know they're not afraid to rotate.
And we know that they'll get their work from these edge rushers that Penn State's going to present on the practice field. We'll talk about that defensive group. We'll break down the defensive depth chart on an upcoming episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast. But other names know at left tackle, Nolan Rucci could emerge as a swing factor. We're going to talk about him at right tackle in a moment. But the Wisconsin transfer, who's put on about 20 pounds. He's pushing 320 now at 6'8", redshirt junior, former 5-star in his own right, though that was 4 years ago. He's going to have a chance to compete. He's only played in college game action on the left side, but the majority of his work came on the right during spring ball. And then JB Nelson remains a versatile piece. You could view him as a backup component at left tackle as well, and more of an emergency situation perhaps if they have some depth issues, but he's in the mix there. And then let's go the other side at right tackle. Anthony Donko, Nolan Rucci, and this may sound strange to some of our listeners, and I'm not even 100% sold on it myself, but I'm almost feeling better about Anthony Donko being the sole starter on his side than I am Drew Shelton being the sole starter on the left side. And that's because everything that we heard about Anthony Donko in January and all the good stuff, I'm still hearing it in June. The kid stepped up. Phil Trautwein tabbed him as the right tackle in waiting behind Caden Wallace in December, knowing that Wallace was putting together a plan that was going to see him play abbreviated action in the Peach Bowl before he turned pro. And this was a guy who didn't play tackle in high school, played like 3 reps of it before December in a Penn State uniform on the practice field, and yet went out and put together a strong half of work. We didn't get to see him in the blue-white game that day, but over the course of the spring, he's a name that kept popping up from defensive linemen, from offensive linemen, from coaches about who's showing up in a big way this spring, who's asserting themselves. A lot of Anthony Donko references, and we got to look at him, that lift for life. And I got to say, he may be the most physically imposing figure on this team. I said it before on the podcast. I told you it in person that day, but he was standing next to Vega Ioane. And if I think you look large standing next to Vega Ioane, that's a real statement. So I think right now, when you look at the physical aspect of this, the fundamental gains that he's made at tackle, getting more comfortable there, and then you throw in what he has on the mental end. And that's something that's been really harped on to us about Anthony Donko since he was recruited from the high school level. Nolan Rucci is there. And I don't want to disregard Nolan Rucci by any means, and he's going to push here. And I think Anthony Donko has embraced his presence. But I think that right now there's a pathway toward him becoming entrenched as Penn State's right tackle for several years, much in a way that we saw Caden Wallace do a while back.
They've got Donko listed at 336 at 6'5" on the updated roster, and I think based on what we've seen from him from Lift for Life, I think that tracks.
That's like 30 pounds. That's like 30 pounds heavier than Drew Shelton and Jayden Williams, just to put it out there.
Yeah, and he just looks physically different than them. Donko just looks hard to move, and he looks like he can really, really move you. And so, yeah, I think that kind of how you framed it as, feeling, more comfortable that you'd be able to name a single starter at right tackle than at left tackle. I think I'm there for you too. There with you too. I think it's going to be. I'm really just. I feel like I've been saying this a lot about some of these players, but I think Donka is just a really exciting prospect to see, to get that kind of performance from him in the Peach Bowl. That no one was really expecting. I want to see how that translates, and I think that's good that there's competition there. It's good that Nolan Rucci is there pushing him, and I think that that's what the staff wants. I think they want Rucci to be pushing him, but I think that Donka is probably in a position where he's rising to the occasion.
And when people in the Lash building are making whispers of Olu Fashanu comparisons, my ears perk up, and we've heard that a couple different times this offseason. Let's focus on the interior spots: left guard, right guard. You've got starting experience. In fact, you got 3 guys with starting experience in these different spots. Right guard, 6-year senior Sal Wormley's back. He wants to prove that he can take another step in his aggression and his physicality. It was a big topic for him and Phil Trautwein to work on this spring. He wants to step up as a leader for this unit as a 6th-year guy, and he's a 3rd-year starter now at the right guard spot. But I think that we're going to have to see at that guard spot who's involved, because Vega Ioane, I don't see leaving the field much. Last year, he was a rotational component. By the end of the year, and due in part because JB Nelson wasn't always available, he was a mainstay at the left guard position for them down the stretch. And so based on the results that you got out of him and what we have heard about Vega Ioane, I don't think he's leaving the field much. So does JB Nelson get into play again as a rotational piece at either guard spot, or is he kind of strictly a backup component for the entire left side, a guy who can play left guard, play left tackle? That would be a bit of a step back for him compared to where he was last preseason camp, last September, as an emerging player, as a starter, after they lost Landon Tengwall to retirement. And then, the other name that is prominent in this discussion is Cooper Cousins. There's been a lot of attention on him at center and trying to push Nick Dawkins, but we saw him start at right guard in the blue-white game for the varsity squad. Sal Wormley, like Tyler Warren, was an observer that day. Nick Singleton was observing. That wasn't the full roster, but Cooper Cousins was the next man up at right guard, and we know he's going to get a lot of work there. And Phil Trautwein said he may be the best freshman offensive lineman he's ever encountered. We don't see true freshman offensive linemen factor in on fall Saturdays often across America, much less here in Happy Valley. But Cooper Cousins seems to be in the thick of it. So to me, it feels like there are truly 4 guards who could play extensively, although we may only see 2, 3 of them playing extensively when this thing kicks off.
Yeah, I really want to see how they settle this in terms of rotations and, who's on the field the most, who starts. I think that that's going to be something that is very curious, because you have a lot of experience and a lot of talent. Like you said, Sal Wormley has probably played the most snaps of anyone on the roster on this offensive line right now, especially with how much he played over the past 2 years, because he was not in a rotation, over these past 2 years when he started. And then Vega Ioane, JV Nelson both started, with Nelson sidelines. Ioane, I think, really took advantage of that opportunity and got a lot of run. And then Cooper Cousins can just kind of shake things up a little bit by, putting someone who is that polished, who comes in with, this level of talent and kind of, knowing what he needs to do. I think that's something that is really significant for this unit too. So, you've got 4 guys that, if you kind of juggled it up and put out any combination of them as your starting guards, you'd probably feel pretty good about it. But what is that actually going to look like? And, what will the offensive line look like in the second quarter, in the third quarter, in crunch time in the fourth quarter? How is Penn State going to, put those pieces together?
It's remarkable the comfort level that seems to be in place and envisioning Cooper Cousins out there on the field for Penn State, August 31st into September, when you just think about how true freshman offensive linemen are typically dealt with. And we have a few of those to get to from a depth perspective, by the way. Garrett Sexton, Egan Boyer, major weight gainers thus far early on in their Penn State careers. Sexton is up from 260 range to 300 pounds. Egan Boyer is up from under 240 pounds to over 270 pounds. Their goal is going to be to get on that travel roster, to earn an opportunity to travel with the varsity squad to these road games. And the same goes for a couple newcomers at guard. Caleb Brewer, Donnie Harbor, both in the freshman class. You've got Addison Penn, who transferred from Duke last year as a veteran in the interior as well. But Nick Dawkins, the last guy to really get to here, yes, he will continue to be pushed by Cooper Cousins. He has been one of Cooper Cousins' largest supporters throughout this last 5-6 months since he got to campus. But Nick Dawkins is in a really good spot from a leadership standpoint, from a schematic standpoint of being in control at center. It's going to be a really fun opportunity to see what it looks like, because Nick Dawkins has had so much cachet with this community, with this locker room, with this roster as a backup offensive lineman, as a guy who spent the entire 2022 season sidelined because of an injury, and to kind of get a chance to see what it might look like with him being the guy who snaps the football for this team on every offensive play, and what his presence could look like. It is a really important aspect potentially, because we don't know who the team captains are going to be yet. James Franklin wasn't ready to tell us. Sounds like the team wasn't ready to vote on them. Sometimes we know a few by now, but I would be very surprised if Nick Dawkins is not named a team captain if he is the starting center for this squad. And so there it is. I mean, did we miss anything? We worked our way position by position. It took a while, but this offense is in flux between the coaching staff, between some of the personnel movements. So wanted to work our way through it fairly diligently. Tell me, did we swing and miss on any of this conversation, in your opinion, or did we get it just about right?
I mean, I think if we missed anyone, we'll hear about it. No, I think that we covered it. I mean, there's at this point in the summer, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of guys that we haven't seen even in practice in Penn State uniforms. Some guys who are injured that we need to see in those Penn State uniforms again. But I feel like that the pieces are there to make for a pretty talented and exciting offense with another year of experience for some key guys and a new offensive coordinator in Andy Kotelnicki.
Well, we will break down the defensive depth chart and how we think that shakes out on another episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast. But for now, thank you to everyone for listening to this episode. On behalf of Daniel Gallen, I am Tyler Donahue. Follow our coverage at Lions247.com and stay tuned for another upcoming episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast.